So if you're thinking about getting into strength training, this is the program I would recommend you run. What's up everyone, my name is Rosendo, welcome to my channel, and this is my first video here on this lifting channel, and this is going to be a channel dedicated to all things lifting, all things strength training. I'm a competitive powerlifter, but I love lifting, I love the gym, so that's what this channel is going to be about. It's for all things lifting, and definitely stick around if you're interested in powerlifting, if you're interested in learning a few things. But today we're talking about programming, we're talking about GZCL, the first ever powerlifting program I ever run. So for all you powerlifters, anyone who's looking to get into strength training, this is the video for you. Alright, but like I said, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about powerlifting programming. Specifically, we're going to be reviewing the GZCL program. This is going to be an in-depth, comprehensive look into this program, and we're going to talk about the ins and outs of it, what works, how I ran it, and if you should run it. Now, GZCL is the first program that I ran, and it's kind of actually the only program that I ran when I was first getting into powerlifting. I would say I had a few years of strength training under my belt, and I really wanted to get into the sport of powerlifting and get my total up. And instead of going for a coach, I opted to look up some programs to do my own, kind of coach myself, to run my own programs, and this is what I ended up with. So again, it's an in-depth review of GZCL, the ins and outs of it, the method, how I ran it, and the results. Now real quick, there are two disclaimers I want to get out of the way about this program and why it worked so well for me, just to give you guys a little bit of context on how everything went when I ran this program. Number one, I was on a pretty aggressive bulk during this program. You know, it was around the time where I'd been strength training for a while and I just wasn't really satisfied with where I was, and I really wanted to get into powerlifting. I'm about 5'11", and I was maybe 175 pounds at the time, and I was so tired of, you know, being at where I was. So at the time of running this program, I was on a pretty aggressive bulk. I was putting on about 4 pounds a week. This whole thing lasted about a year, about 12 4-week blocks. And I put on about 20 pounds going from 175 to 195. Sorry, that's actually from 175 to 205. I know I ended at 93 kilos because that was my weight class. So I think I ended around 203 pounds. We'll call it 93 kilos. So that's a little bit of context there. Again, a pretty aggressive bulk, 4 pounds a week. Again, just so you guys have a little bit of context on what was going on while I was running this program. And second disclaimer I want you guys to know is this was actually my first time on any formal periodization. So I'm not saying that this program is magic and it would work for everyone, because I'd been strength training for a while, but I'd never really kind of followed a periodized program. So that's another reason why this could have worked so well. I'm going to talk about, you know, my total and the results at the end. But just two things I want you guys to know is A, I was on a pretty aggressive bulk, and B, this was my first time on any formal periodization and on a formal kind of 4-week block program. So it's possible that anything could have worked doing those two things. But again, that's beside the point. We're talking about the program here. Again, I just wanted you guys to have a little bit of context on what was going on in my life and kind of in my and behind the scenes while I was running this program. All right, so GZCL, what is it? Should you run it? How does it work? Let's talk about that. GZCL, I believe, comes from the mind of Cody Lefevre. Don't really know him, but I know that's the name of the guy who invented this method, what we're going to call a method, because it kind of gets grouped under programs, but GZCL is really a method. It's more of a set of guidelines more than it is a program, which is one of the pros about it. At the end of the video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of this program. But again, this is more of a method than it is a program. It doesn't give you what weights you should work out and what exercises to do. It just gives you more of a set of guidelines, a set of rules, so that you can build your own program. So the GZCL method, what is the GZCL method? This is, from my understanding, a pretty famous pyramid in the strength training world, where this kind of gives you the breakdown. This section right here gives you the breakdown of what is GZCL, what it is, how you would run it, and kind of the ideas behind it, the concepts and the guidelines behind GZCL. Now, the way GZCL is run and kind of the way it starts is you start with a weight that you're already pretty comfortable with, a weight that you can kind of come into the gym and know you can do even on a bad day for a few reps, and that's where the program really starts. And the whole basis of the program is you have a goal weight every single block. And your goal is to increase the amount of reps you can do with that goal weight. So if you start with a weight that you can, confidently do 2 or 3 reps of, on a bad day, you want to see if you can end the block doing a few more reps, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 reps with that weight at the end of the block. So GZCL is really all about moving weight you can already move, but better and for more reps. Now this is the famous GZCL pyramid. It's split into 3 tiers where you kind of have different tiers of your workout, or rather of your lifts. In this case, we're looking at squat, bench, and deadlift because I'm a power lifter, and those were the things I was prioritizing, and they might be the things you're prioritizing as well. But the idea is you have this pyramid, and in these 3 different tiers are the different ranges that you want to be training your movements, in this case, squat, bench, and deadlift. Obviously, you have the top of the pyramid, tier 1, where you have squat, bench, and deadlift, and those are really the lifts that you want to improve. That's where you train heavy, and you really want to get your top end strength right here. In the middle, you have your variations. Those are the things that improve your technique. They kind of get the volume in. They make sure you're getting a good baseline for those 3 lifts. And that's where kind of the most of the rep work is really done. And then finally, you have what we call the foundation of the pyramid. This is all the work that everything else is built on. This is your accessory work. This is your muscle mass. This is everything that allows you to go into the gym, train for high volume. And again, it's the foundation of your pyramid, because without this, you can't really have the top end strength, and everything gets built off that foundation. So how does GZCL actually work? What are the guidelines to run this program? Let's say you're designing a training block, or in this case, a training week. These are kind of your suggestions for how you want to go about it. You want to make sure that in your week, you have your tier 1, your tier 2, and your tier 3 lifts. And the way you kind of go about this is, in your tier 1 work, you have your primary lifts that you want to improve. Let's take squat, bench, and deadlift. We're going to take squat, bench, and deadlift in tier 1 for kind of the rest of this video. That is where you get your high-end work. This is so you get comfortable with heavy weights, so you get exposed to heavy weights, and frankly, it's to train heavy because our goal is to increase our 1 rep max, at least in a powerlifter's case. So with your tier 1 training, your squat, bench, and deadlift, you want to be training anywhere from 85 to 100% of your goal weight, where again, your goal weight is something that you can already do for reps. It's something that you can already do comfortably. We're just trying to do that better. So you're training anywhere from 85 to 100%, and you're doing anywhere from 10 to 15 reps in total. So a 3x4 or a 4x3 or something like that. Now your tier 1 work is generally done anywhere from 1 to 5 reps. I found different sources. One of them says that you should do anywhere from 1 to 3 reps in your tier 1. The other one says you should do anywhere from 3 to 5 reps in your tier 1. But the point is your tier 1 is low reps, let's call it 3 or so reps, plus or minus a few reps, all done for 10 to 15 reps in total. Now your tier 2 is where you get your variations. That's where you really focus on your technique. This is meant to be done at 65 to 85% of your goal weight from anywhere from 20 to 30 reps in total. So again, a 4x5 or a 5x6 or something like that. Now this is a good place to run any variations that support your tier 1, your primary, your top end strength work. Think pause bench presses, pause deadlifts, pause squats, tempos, Larsons, things like that. And finally, you have your tier 3 work, your accessories. Generally, this is recommended that you run any less than 65% of your goal weight. That's going to be if you're running something pretty close to your primary lifts. Maybe if you're running, if you're running like a close grip bench, or maybe like a front squat or something really kind of related to what your primary movement is. But if it's just an accessory work, you're doing anywhere from 30 plus reps, 30 or more. So like 3x10, a 4x10, 3x12, whatever you want to do. But this is just meant to be light, get your baseline, get your hypertrophy in, and it could really be anything. It's recommended to be less than 65 if it's very, very similar to your primary lift, again, like the ones I mentioned before. But again, this is just your accessory work, notably for 30 or more reps. Now, the big takeaway here is that the general recommendation and guideline is that you keep this ratio of volume between your tiers. At your tier 1 work, for every rep you do in tier 1, you do 2 reps in tier 2, and you do 3 reps in tier 3, more or less. And that's how you build that pyramid. GZCL is kind of all about the pyramid here, where you have your foundation that supports your top end strength. And to get to that top end strength, you really build up to it. And this is what you really try to improve. That's where your goal weight is, and that's what your goal is. All right, now per typical powerlifting programming, the general idea is that this is meant to be run in about more or less 4-week blocks. And as the weeks go up, the reps decrease. And actually the goal weight also increases, or rather the percentage of the goal weight you're working at increases. So let's say you run week 1, you're starting off with 85% of your goal weight with, let's say, a 3x5 or something like that. As the weeks go by, as the weeks go up, you're meant to be doing less total reps, most likely less reps per set, and the goal weight starts to creep up, maybe 87.5, maybe 90, 92.5, 95%, or whatever. And again, per usual powerlifting programming, the weeks go by, the weeks go up, the reps go down in total, and you're ending your week 4 with an AMRAP of 100% of your goal weight. Remember, this is not necessarily meant to increase your 1 rep max, although you can use it that way. This is meant to take weight that you can already move, but move it for better reps, which is why you end with an AMRAP of your goal weight. General idea is you take your goal weight, you add 5 pounds to it for the next block. If you do 3 reps, you add about 10 pounds. If you do 4 or more reps, you can add 15 pounds to your goal weight, and that is your new goal weight for the next block, so that you can repeat all this again and again and again. Welcome to powerlifting. You're probably doing it forever. So as you can see, this is more of a set of guidelines. This is not a program. This is meant to give you a set of rules, kind of some guidance so that you can build your own program. And it's just kind of telling you, hey, these are the weights you can kind of be working with. Take your goal weight, do maybe this reps in the tier 1, this many reps in tier 2, this many reps in tier 3, and just build your pyramid up higher and higher until you're moving weight that you used to move, but better for more reps, increase the goal weight, and run it again. That is the foundation of GZCL. It's meant to increase your goal weight. It's meant to have you moving weight that you moved before better. And at times you're going to find that you have improved your 1 rep max if you run it long enough, but that's really up for you to decide. But again, this is the premise of GZCL. Not really a program, more of a method, more of a methodology. And this is something that I had a lot of success with when I was running it from the end of 23 to the end of 24. All right, so now that you guys have an idea of how GZCL works, we're gonna talk about my GZCL program, how I ran it, what worked for me, and what the results were, how much stronger I got by the end. Now again, 2 more disclaimers. Number 1, this is just how I ran it. This is not how you are supposed to run it. This is not meant to be a recreation so that you guys can run everything at your own risk. Make sure you guys do everything appropriately. This is not a recommendation for you guys. This is just how I ran my program. And number 2 disclaimer, this is kind of a very rough program. This was my first time on periodization. I'm not saying everything is perfect. I'm not saying this is how you should do it. I'm not even saying this is a good way of doing it. I'm just saying this is how I ran it and this is what happened at the end. I'm going to tell you guys what worked and what didn't work, because although this is a rough program, some things worked really, really well and some things did not work well, which I'll talk about at the end. Some things worked well for a bit and then they kind of fell off. So again, this is just how I ran it. This is not how I would run it if I were to do it again, even if I decided to do this program again. But again, this is just for your information. And again, the last disclaimer I actually want to make is that I think this is a good program for those intermediate strength athletes or beginner powerlifters, because it doesn't really do a lot of things that advanced powerlifters or even intermediate powerlifters would need. And for strength athletes, this is a good way to kind of get used to periodization. Again, I'll talk more about that in the end, in the pros and cons. But if you haven't periodized before, this is going to be a good way to kind of dip your toe in the water and get an idea for how that works. If you're intermediate, if you're advanced, this might not be the program for you. If you're starting to get into being an intermediate powerlifter, this might not be the program for you. But that's the other thing I wanted to say about this, is this worked well because it was my first time on periodization. This would not work for me, at least the way I have it right now, again, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in the end. All right, so how did my GZCL program look? My training was split into 4 days where I have a lower body day, an upper body day, a lower body, upper body day. Pretty standard stuff that you would see. Now, my lower body days consisted of a tier 1 primary lift with a secondary tier 2 of a different lift, and my upper body days were really just bench on those days. Now, when we look at it day by day, on day 1, I had my tier 1 squat, my primary squat, and my tier 2 deadlift, my secondary deadlift, where I start with my squat 3x3 at about 85%. Let's say this is a week 1 of the block. Let's say I'm starting out 3x3 at 85% with a 4x5 at 65% on my tier 2 deadlift, on my secondary deadlift. Moving on to day 2, we just have a secondary bench to recover a little bit from squats. There's some nuances to that I'll talk about later. But we have a 4x6 at 65%. I believe I ran a pause deadlift. Maybe I ran a Larson. I can't even remember. It might have even been a Spoto press at one point. And actually, on that note, the 4x5 secondary deadlift I think was pauses as well. But again, the tier 2s are just variations of the primary lift. Moving on to day 3, where you have my primary deadlift, 3x3 at 85%, same thing as the squat, and a 4x5 at 65% on my tier 2 squat. That's actually missing right there. There you go, plus tier 2 squat, 4x5 at 65%. I think I did some pauses for some time. I think I did some high bar for some time after that. But again, that's just a secondary. That's a variation on a squat. And moving on to day 4, where you have just a primary bench day, 3x3 at 85%. That's kind of the pattern here, where you go from 85%, you move it up, but 85% 3x3. Sometimes I did 3x4. The bench days were a little bit more kind of taking with what I had on the day. But everything else was pretty fixed, 4x5s at 65 and moving your way up. Sorry, 5s on the squat and deadlift and 6s on the bench. Now you'll notice that I actually kind of broke rule number 1, where if you're meant to be doing 10 to 15 reps on the tier 1 lifts, I was actually doing 9 reps. I'll talk more about that later, which is why I was kind of throwing in extra reps on the bench. I was maybe doing like a 3-3-4 or something like that. But on the primary lifts, it kind of worked really well, especially because if you can't tell, which you can't tell right now, squats really beat me up. I'm a taller lifter and I have longer femurs. Squats were definitely necessary to 3x3. Probably could have gotten away with a little bit more on the deadlift volume. But again, this is not about what you should be doing or what I should have done. This is just about what I did and what happened at the end. All right, and per usual, powerlifting programming, and in this case, GZCL guidelines. As the weeks go by, I ran this in 4-week blocks. As the weeks go by, the reps go down. Week 3, the only main difference is in my primary lifts, instead of doing a 3x3, I did a 3x2. Let's say week 2 was a 3x3 at 90%. Week 3 might be a 3x2 at 95%. Definitely lower volume. I'll mention more about that later, but that's what you did there. And week 4, you did an AMRAP at 100% per GZCL guidelines. Volume didn't really change much on the secondaries. You just go up in weight, 65, 70, 75%, whatever. I think the 4x6 went down to a 4x5 on week 3 on bench, but something like that. The main takeaway is that the weight was going up. The goal weight, the percentage of the goal weight was going up, and subsequently the weight was also going up. And that's basically how I ran it for about 12 blocks. Big takeaway here is I would kind of run this triples block program for maybe 2 or 3 blocks. And then I would retest my 1 rep max just for another block where I would kind of take the goal weight of, I would set my goal weight to be a 1 rep max and I would increase it that way just to make sure my 1 rep max was going up and to test my 1 rep max because I was a powerlifter at the end of the day, or an aspiring one. I hadn't competed up to that point, but that's a story for another time. But the general idea was I would run it for triples for, 2, 3 blocks, maybe usually around 3. Then I would run it with a 1 rep max attempt, get a new 1 rep max, and then repeat GZCL, taking a weight that I used to just do for a few reps and then add more to it. Keep doing that with a new goal weight and a new goal weight, redo a 1 rep max, choose a goal weight that I could do comfortably for a few reps, get more reps on that, and run it again and again and again for about 12 or 13 blocks here. I think I did about 13 before I did my first competition, and that's a video for another time, but I did about 13 blocks of GZCL. All right, so what ended up happening? What happened at the end? Again, the two things I want you guys to keep in mind is that I was on a pretty aggressive bulk, about 30 pounds in total, 4 pounds per week, and that this was my first time on any formal periodization, so it's possible that anything could have worked, but let's take a look at the results. Starting with my first block of GZCL on squats. The first weight I ever used was 255 pounds. I did that for 5. It was a weight I was pretty comfortable with, and it was my first block, so I was able to put a whole 5 on my squat, bench, and deadlift, versus later in the GZCL program, I was putting up maybe 3 or 4 on my in reps, 3 or 4 reps on my in reps, but the first one was 5 because I started pretty light. But in any case, block number 1 started at 255 pounds, 115 kilos, for 5 reps. Again, rookie numbers. That's why I was on a pretty aggressive bulk and why I really wanted to get stronger, but video for another time. And cycle 13, right before my competition, actually ended with 375 pounds on 170 kilo squat for 1 rep. That was definitely a really tough 1 rep max attempt. All right, on bench, starting with the goal weight of 190 pounds for 5 on the first block of GZCL I ever ran. 12 blocks later, I ended up with 242 pounds, 110 kilos for 2. You'll notice that this is cycle 12 and not cycle 13. I actually didn't break that many PRs. I didn't break any PRs, if I remember correctly, on cycle 13, which is something I'll talk about in the pros and cons. But the best performance I put up on GZCL was in cycle 12, where I did 110 kilos for 2. Just a quick side note, I actually got really used to kilos because the first block I did of GZCL, I was still in a commercial gym. After block number 2 and moving on, I switched to a powerlifting gym, and I got really used to training in kilos. So I'm going to be a little bit more comfortable talking about the kilo weights I moved here, but that's just for a little bit more context. All right, and finally, deadlift. We have cycle 1 where I started at 325 pounds for 5, finishing at 430 pounds or 195 kilos for 1. Also on cycle 12, cycle 13 didn't go all that well, but we're going to talk a little bit about that over here and in the pros and cons at the end. Oh, and I should note that on this 5th rep, because I was still in a commercial gym, I actually think I could have done this for 6, but the spotter didn't quite, do things properly. I ended up helping me out as soon as I started grinding it a little bit. So I could have had 190 for 6, but I got 5. The spotter touched the bar on the 6. But it doesn't really make that much of a difference at the end of the day. All right, and what is the result of all of this? Let's take my total where I started with the training max. Right before I started this GZCL program, I just kind of did a training max. I wasn't peaked. I wasn't, really building up to it. I just said, let me get under the bar and do whatever I can for 1 rep at this moment. So that's what these numbers are based off of. My training max was what I did right before I started this GZCL program. They're not necessarily the best numbers I ever hit, but they're the numbers that I hit, on a training day, on a regular, normal training day, just going into the gym right before I started this program. So what is the outcome? Taking my squat of 285. My 1 rep max at the time was actually 315, but I was really struggling to recreate it, which is why I started getting into the whole programming thing. But I really could not, I did not have that top end strength at the time. So my training max was 285, took it all the way to 375. That's about 130 kilos to 170, increase of 90 pounds or 40 kilos. On bench, you take 210 pounds, which was my 1 rep max at the time. That one I could recreate, so I confidently use that number. All the way to 248, that's an increase of 38 pounds, which is also 95 kilos to 112.5 kilos, 17.5 kilo increase. And finally, you have your deadlift at 355 pounds. I believe my 1 rep max at the time was 375, which I probably could have recreated, but at the 20 pound difference doesn't make that much big of a deal when it comes to deadlift. So we're going to take 355 as my training max all the way to 430. That is 75 pound increase, or 161 kilos to 195, a 34 kilo increase. And where does that leave me with my total? My total went all the way from 850 pounds to 1,053 pounds, or a 203 pound increase, or from 386 kilos to 477.5, 91.5 kilo increase, while I ran GZCL for about 12 blocks. Sorry, 13 blocks. And one of the things I forgot to mention is the reason I used 112 kilos here on my bench, but 110 here is, again, my best performance was 110 for 2. And the highest I ever did for a 1 rep max was 112.5 for one. So that's what I used on the bench press. All right, and there you go. That's the result of running GZCL for 13 blocks. Again, as you can clearly see right here, my numbers were pretty amateur, at least for a powerlifter. For a strength athlete, they're okay, just for a guy going in the gym trying to get stronger. But for a powerlifter, my numbers were pretty amateur. So I did get an increase doing this very rough program. So you guys can do what you want with that information, because again, this is very rough. This is not like how I train right now at all, and I'm getting a lot stronger, a lot more stronger actually, right now. But again, you can see that I did make a pretty decent increase, 203 pounds to my total. But that's just because, I was still an amateur, 850 pounds all the way to even a 1,000-pound club is still pretty on the low end, especially for powerlifters. So you can see the changes, you can see the results, but just keep in mind that this was for someone who was pretty new to powerlifting and kind of to the strength world. Although I had plenty of strength training under my belt, these numbers speak for themselves. I wasn't all that strong really at the end of the day when I was running this. All right, and that is GZCL. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about the pros and the cons of the program and kind of give my overall opinion on the program, when I think you should run it, what it does well, what it doesn't do well, and all that stuff. All right, starting with the pros. Number one thing I will not include in the pros column is getting stronger, because really that should happen with any program. Getting stronger is not unique to GZCL. You should be getting stronger with any program you run. So although yes, a pro is that you will get stronger, that is not a pro unique to GZCL. It's one of the things I really want to include. I want to include pros and cons that are unique to this program, not generally apply to every single program, because no matter what program you'll run, you will get stronger, or at least you should be. So while that definitely goes in the pro column, that is not a pro unique to GZCL. We're going to talk about pros and cons unique to GZCL. All right, so in my eyes, there are 3 pros to GZCL. Number one is, as you can tell, GZCL is pretty customizable. You can kind of run it whatever you want in any way you want. And instead of running a super fixed program, you kind of have the full creativity to do whatever you want, choose your days, choose how you want to organize things. And really, it's really up to you. You are kind of the creator of your own program. So although some might consider it a con, and well, I guess it is a con in some ways, I do think it's a pro that you're fully customizing it. You can do whatever you want. You can design it in any way that you like or that you enjoy, or in any way that you find effective. That's actually one of the reasons I really like 9 reps on the squats, because squats definitely beat me up. There are a few other programs I tried to run before GZCL that I just did not like because the squats were just too hard on me. Other things probably could have worked. Bench and deadlift I probably could have gone away with. But again, you are able to customize it. I really like the fact that I did 3x3. It worked really well with squats. It worked okay with deadlifts, and we'll talk about bench a little bit later. But the fact that you can customize and the fact that you can do whatever you want with it does give you a lot of opportunities to do what you need to do to adjust things and really make it fit your training. All right, pro number 2. This is a very good way to get into periodization. And when I use periodization, I just kind of mean programs where you're really increasing a variable over time, where you're training in blocks and you're really going block to block instead of just going into the gym and lifting things, which is definitely what I was doing before I started getting into all these programs. So if you want to get started with periodization, if you don't really know where to start, but you know you need it in your program, GZCL is a great way to really get through that. There are a lot of other programs that do that, but when it comes with working, week to week and block to block and really building something in a 4-week block and kind of getting used to that periodization, GZCL is a good way to do that. I'm not sure how many programs do that. I'm not sure how many programs don't do that. But if you're looking to get into periodization, if you think it's about that time in your training, because a lot of people can get away with going into the gym and just lifting things and doing more when they feel strong, but at a certain point, periodization will be necessary. I think GZCL is a good way to get to that periodization, and it's a good way to kind of learn about it, to try it out, to see what it's about, before you ultimately A, stick with it, or B, do a different program. And finally, the last pro, which I think is a super pro for GZCL, is that it's a very good way to learn about yourself. Like I said, you can fully customize it however you want. But the good thing about customizing it is you can learn a lot of things about yourself. You can learn what works, what doesn't work. You can learn what you like, what you don't like. And you can kind of get to learn a little bit more about, your training, your body, and what works best for you. Because, well, you're fully customizing it. You can run it however you want. And it's a good way to kind of get to know yourself a little bit better. For example, that is one of the ways I learned that squats beat me up. I kind of knew that I always sucked at squats, and I still kind of do. Because, as I mentioned before, long femurs, 5'11". So it really gave me good insight that, I really like lower volume on squats. My squats actually did really well here. Ignoring the fact that my training max was at 285 and that my true 1 rep max was at 315, I didn't really have a lot of success with squats until I started running this program, because I found squats so hard to recreate. I couldn't really get my energy kind of right in squats. But with the lower volume, which is something I learned running this program, I learned a lot about myself and I was able to make some pretty good gains to my squat. So again, when it comes to learning about yourself, when it comes to, hey, I want to know who I am as a lifter, I want to know what works and what doesn't, I think GZCL is a fantastic way to learn more about yourself and to really kind of get an idea for what works for you, what doesn't, and how you want to train if you want to make your own program and just kind of get an idea for what works. So again, super big pro in the pro column. GZCL, great way to learn about yourself because you customize everything. You can see what works and what doesn't. I think it's fantastic. All right, and now moving on to the cons. Number one, this one's on my opinion. GZCL is not a dedicated powerlifting program. I am a powerlifter now, and at the time I would say I wanted to be a powerlifter. I say that because I hadn't competed yet. But GZCL is not a traditional powerlifting program. So if you're running this for powerlifting, maybe hold off, maybe try to do something else. I'll mention that a little bit later. But if you're trying to run this for powerlifting, if it's your first ever periodization, it worked for me, you can try it if you like. But this is definitely not specific to powerlifting where, you have your top sets and your back downs and you're trying to really kind of see what works. You're working into, peaking into a meet or things like that. So again, if you're trying to run this for powerlifting, I would say it's not the best for that. For general strength athletes, I love it. If you're just trying to kind of get into periodization and learn a little bit more about yourself, I love GZCL. But for powerlifting specifically, I don't quite think it kind of checks that box. Again, I would say this is for maybe intermediate strength athletes or beginner powerlifters if you're really just trying to kind of get to know yourself and really starting to train your SBD. But if you have a little bit of powerlifting experience and strength and periodization under your belt, this is probably not the right path for you. All right, and con number two. As I mentioned, this program is probably best for intermediate strength athletes or beginner powerlifters. There are some things that this program does that I don't really think would work for advanced lifters or intermediate powerlifters that really want to get stronger. The percentages of the goal weights are kind of high. For example, I was able to do on a week 3 a 3x2 at 95% of my goal weight. In some cases, that was my 1 rep max. There's no way I can do a 3x2 at 95% now in my program week after week. Maybe one day if it's a lift I'm good at, like deadlift, not on squats, never in a million years. But if it's a deadlift, maybe I could do that, but there's just no point. It wouldn't fit in my program anyways. It would beat me up too much. So it does kind of recommend numbers that I think are more appropriate for kind of more amateur lifters like myself at this time. Anyone who's intermediate in the lifting world, maybe around a little bit less the 1,000-pound club or so, or maybe if you're just getting into powerlifting for the first time. But again, some of these numbers, some of these recommendations don't quite really fit for anyone who has some experience, who has some strength training under their belt. If you guys have run this and you guys have found a way to customize it so that it works and you are on the stronger end of things and you guys have experience, let me know. I'd be totally willing to hear what you guys have to say. But again, at least the way I ran it and kind of the general guidelines, the 1-2-3 volume, taking that goal weight and working at 90 or 95% of it when you're starting to push your 1 rep maxes, I don't really think is appropriate for really advanced strength athletes or anyone more than just a beginner powerlifter. All right, and finally, con number 3. This is where I get to talk about what worked and what didn't work for this program when I ran it. So a few things. Number 1, squats. I think it worked fantastic for squats. I was able to do lower volume, and even though I was able to get away with things like 3x2 at 95%, that's just because I wasn't all that strong at that time, and again, I was on a pretty aggressive bulk. But I think the lower amount of volume really worked for squats. Deadlifts. It actually worked pretty well for deadlifts. I ran into some other issues, just for a little bit of context, where once I started to push about 100, I was actually pulling sumo while I was doing this. And while I was pushing 195 pounds body weight, sumo just went downhill. My deadlifts really just kind of hit a plateau, a hard plateau. And then after GZCL, I switched to conventional, and I'm all the way up here now. So again, this worked well for deadlifts. Overall, I would say it worked well for deadlifts up until I hit that sumo plateau, but it was working really well. And finally, bench. This program did not work well for bench from a powerlifting perspective. As you can see, I put about 38 pounds on my bench, and a lot of that was in the first half maybe, where things were really rolling. I was periodizing bench for the first time, and I was making some incredible gains, but those did hit a plateau very quickly. And near the end, my bench wasn't really working well with this program, and I could have changed a few things around it. Sure, I could have maybe adjusted it, and I did adjust it, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, bench can do a lot more volume than I think GZCL recommends. So this definitely is not the best program for bench because, I mean, most powerlifters I know are benching at least 3 times a week. So this does not fit well in the bench world. Speaking of where he doesn't fit well, Cycle 13 was actually what I called my peaking block going into my meet. It was where I was able to hit 375 pounds. And without a set peaking guideline, this doesn't really work well going into meets unless you really know what you're doing. Again, I'd kind of adjusted things and played it by ear, and it worked well on squats. It didn't really work well on bench and deadlift, which is why you see cycle 12 was my best bench performance, and my best deadlift performance was also cycle 12. So again, going into a meet, things really started to fall apart, and that was just because of my lack of experience. Maybe if I'd done a meet before and I knew what worked, maybe I could do this again and rewrite things and do things a little bit better. But from a specific powerlifting perspective, this didn't really work well going into a meet, and definitely left out a lot of room on bench, because you can kind of bench however many times you want, but benching 3 times a week and trying to follow the GZCL guidelines, I think would be really hard. You'd probably end up with a lot less volume than you need. And that's one of the things that I definitely think that this program lacks in is bench press, especially for powerlifters who bench 3, maybe even 4 times a week. I know some lighter lifters that bench, more than 3 times, and some heavier lifters that bench 2 times if they're really big and really strong. And I don't know of any, but I know that's a thing. So definitely leaves a lot of room on bench for the vast amount of lifters. And that's definitely something that struggled and impacted my performance on my performance on bench, is that I wasn't really able to perform how I could have if I had, say, gotten a coach. All right, so that is it on the pros and cons. Big takeaway, do I like this program? Do I recommend this program? Absolutely. I really like GZCL. Again, it's a very good way to get to know yourself. If you're a strength athlete and it's your first time getting into periodization, great program. If you're just trying to get into powerlifting for the first time and you can't really afford a coach, or you don't want a coach, or you just kind of want to test things out and learn a little bit about yourself first, great program. Other than that, let's say I'm coming from a powerlifting perspective. I can't talk about this for any other sports, even if you're just a general strength athlete. From a powerlifting perspective, I think you're a lot better off with a coach. I actually ran this program for about 13 cycles, did my first meet, and then I got a coach. And it's a whole world of a difference. You're following a dedicated powerlifting program, and it really kind of fills in the gaps for powerlifting that GZCL does not have for powerlifting. So if you're a powerlifter and you're thinking about running a program or maybe getting a coach, me personally, I would recommend a coach. But if it's your first time, if you're just starting out, if you don't want to commit to a coach yet, and you just kind of want to get into powerlifting, I think I would run GZCL, because again, it's a good way to get to know about yourself. You can customize it however you want. And I do think you can make pretty good gains if you're pretty new to powerlifting and you're just, getting into periodization for the first time. I think this is a great program that you can run to get to know a little bit about yourself, make some gains, and to get to know a little bit about how periodization works, what it does, and to try it out for yourself to see how things go before you commit to a coach, if you decide to commit to a coach. Which again, if you're a powerlifter, I would recommend a coach. I probably could have done a lot better if I had a coach at this time, but I have one now. I would not leave my coach to run GZCL again, I will tell you that much. Even now that I know how powerlifting programming works, and maybe I could try to design a better program specific for powerlifters, I just think A, it would be really hard using these guidelines, and B, a coach just makes things a lot better, makes things a lot easier. It takes all the pressure off of you to program, which is something that was definitely catching up to me leading into my meet. I was really kind of anxious about making sure I choose everything right and doing everything, especially since it was my first meet. Again, it was my first meet, so it wasn't a big deal. It's not like I was trying to, do anything crazy. And as you saw, my numbers weren't anything crazy at all. So it's not the end of the world. I was running GZCL into it, and I got to learn a lot about myself. But nowadays, I have a coach. I would definitely stick with my coach. If you're a powerlifter, I would recommend a coach. But if you're just getting into the sport, you can't afford one, or you don't want to commit to one yet, I would recommend GZCL if you're just starting to get into powerlifting. All right, and that is about it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you guys learned a little bit about this program. Again, I do notice that there's a lot of kind of gaps in the market on, program reviews and certain powerlifting things. That's why I really wanted to make this video, so I can talk about my experience with GZCL, what it does and how it works. So this channel is going to be for a lot of lifting things. I want to talk about lifting things for all people. I'm actually a personal trainer, so I kind of know what the general population needs, because you'd be surprised. Anyone in the lifting world, myself included, is really out of touch for what the general population needs. People like myself who have been lifting for a long time, we kind of know the ins and outs of the gym. But a lot of people in the general population, they don't even know what the machines do. They don't know what the muscles are. They hardly really know anything about the gym. And that's pretty normal, right? I was really out of touch when I first started training people, because it kind of opened my eyes as to how little people know and how much guidance they need. And the fact that I love the gym, I love lifting, and a lot of people don't. So, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about on this channel that are for the general population. But at the end of the day, I'm a powerlifter. I also want to talk about powerlifting things. So this channel will have a little bit of everything. It'll have things for beginners, it'll have things for intermediate, and it'll have things for advanced people, particularly powerlifters, because I can't get advanced in other sports like weightlifting or CrossFit or bodybuilding or anything like that. But if we're talking advanced stuff, I'll definitely talk advanced stuff in powerlifting. Other than that, you might hear some beginner things out of me. You might hear some intermediate things out of me. You'll hear things lifting, gyms, product reviews, whatever. So definitely subscribe if that sounds like your thing. This is definitely a more advanced video, but I'll have a little bit of everything on this channel. So thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions about the program, about my experience running it, about my lifting now, or anything. I want this channel to be a place of discussion, so definitely drop anything you have in the comments and we can all kind of talk and discuss and, you know, share our passion for the gym. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.